What are the cargo theft trends of 2025 so far, and what can fleets do ahead of July 4th to protect their freight over the long holiday weekend?
You're watching CCJ's 1044, a weekly webisode that brings you the latest trucking industry news and updates from the editors of CCJ. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you'll never miss an installment of 1044.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Jason Cannon and my co-host is Matt Cole. As we've covered on the 1044 in the past, cargo theft activity has skyrocketed across the country over the last couple of years. The July 4 holiday is just a few weeks away, and cargo thieves are always more active during holidays when trucks sit longer than they usually do.
We know cargo theft activity has been surging for a couple of years now, but what does the first half of 2025 look like?
2025 isn't showing us anything different than what we've seen over the last couple of years, right? So cargo theft continues to be at all-time high rates. I've been doing this for 30 years roughly, and according to the CargoNet numbers, cargo theft remains at all-time high rates. So we're not really seeing across the industry any indication that cargo theft is slowing down. One of the most common questions I get is, hey, when is it going to go back to normal? And my comment is, because of the fundamental changes that we've seen in cargo theft over the last 3 or 4 years, this is the new normal, barring any significant changes that nobody's anticipating right now or nobody sees coming. This is the new normal. We saw between 2022 and 2024, beginning of 2022 to the end of 2024, we saw cargo theft go up, according to CargoNet, over 90%. And from those same CargoNet numbers, we saw the report that indicated that strategic theft in particular had seen a 1,475% increase in that same period of time. So strategic theft went from, roughly, depending on what year you were looking at, 3 to 5% of all cargo theft to roughly 33% of all cargo theft. And that went up, that increase in strategic theft hit the industry so fast that I think it had the industry largely on its heels. I think the trend within that trend is that for the most part, for most of my career, there would be 5 to 6 cargo theft methods in play at any given time. But what the industry is faced with right now is between 15 and 20 different methods in play when you combine between strategic theft and straight theft. So it's a lot more for the industry to have to defend itself against.
Scott says one of the ways that he's seen strategic cargo theft grow within just the last year or so is through phishing emails and other social engineering methods targeting trucking companies.
A year ago, I was asked at a speaking event that I was doing, hey, how often are you seeing phishing emails, social engineering-based emails, people getting into trucking companies' email accounts and things like that? And again, a year ago, my answer to that, my reply to that at that time was, we see it across the industry, but it's not that frequent. As we sit here today, that's a daily occurrence for the industry. And that's something that the industry is really struggling with, is these phishing emails and these social engineering emails are put together so well that it's hard to get somebody not to click on them. Some of them have come out and they look so authentic, and the link will actually take you to a cloned load board or things like that, where you think you're on a load board that you're familiar with and you're entering your credentials, and that gives somebody access to your emails, and they create an email account under your company name. So that's one of the trends within that strategic theft trend that we're seeing a big increase in across the industry. When we go to the TAPA conference, the Southwest Transportation Security Conference, that topic is widely talked about right now. Just last week was the Midwest Conference, and it was a big topic of conversation at that conference too. So that's one of the big trends within the trend of strategic theft. And then I think, the continued double brokering scams, that's the most frequent method that the industry is seeing within that strategic theft. Keep in mind, though, even though we've seen that big increase in strategic theft, straight theft is still 65 to 67% of all cargo theft, and pilferage in particular has seen big increases in its numbers, and in particular parts of the country as well.
To counteract the explosion of cargo theft, Scott believes trucking needs to develop a culture around supply chain security like it has around safety.
The industry as a whole needs to develop a culture around supply chain security. Decades ago, you're well aware, as with anybody in the transportation industry, decades ago, the industry developed a culture around safety, and everybody was involved in that. And that's a great thing. It was needed, and it's been a positive. We're at that point where the industry needs to develop a culture around cargo theft prevention. And that, what I mean by that is, it can't just be, well, that's the trucking company's responsibility, or in this case, that's the freight broker's responsibility, or that's the shipper's responsibility. It has to be all of those entities getting together and dovetailing their practices so that they're working with one another, so that there's not gaps in between each of those entities and the thieves can't prey on those gaps. There has to be that cohesiveness and that culture developed across the industry. I think we're starting to see the outset of that. In May, I serve as the chairman for TAPA, which is the Transport Asset Protection Association. And in May, we hosted the National Cargo Theft Summit. We had record-breaking attendance. And there was a very good mix of shippers, freight brokers, trucking companies, all there. And everybody was openly talking about what they're dealing with. And to me, that's the beginning of developing that culture. Just the fact that everybody's willing to talk about it and then talk about the solutions together.
With how cargo theft has trended in recent years and continues to trend this year, it's important that trucking companies always be alert and do everything they can to protect their freight and their equipment. The importance just ramps up around the holidays, like July the 4th.
I think the first thing is just a general heightened awareness that cargo thieves have always loved the long weekend holiday. We've always seen increases of cargo theft across the industry. CargoNet does a great job of putting those numbers out, the increases that they saw over Memorial Day, Labor Day, 4th of July, Thanksgiving weekend, you name it. CargoNet will always put that out, and they'll put a warning out in advance. A lot of different industry entities will put a warning out in advance of those weekends. Why do they like that? Well, it really just, part of it is, they know there's going to be more freight moving or certain freight in demand for those times a year. But also, or the bigger part of it is, they have an additional day where they think there's going to be less eyes on. And unfortunately, they're usually right. There are fewer eyes on, right? People take those holidays off, or you have a smaller or lighter, thinner staff working for those long weekends. And so their mentality is, hey, we have an extra day before any eyeballs are on us, or before we have to start answering questions as to why the delivery hasn't been made. It gives them an extra day to squirrel away with the cargo before anybody starts asking questions or starts to look for it. So how do you prepare for that? Be prepared to have excellent communication. If you have key loads, if you have loads that are out there for these long weekends or for any of these key days that are coming up, build communication around them. Build really good communication around them. What's the status of those? If you have tracking, make sure you're employing the tracking. But not only deploying the tracking in the loads and using it within the freight, but making sure you're monitoring it, making sure you're using the capabilities of those tracking to stay up to date while the drivers are on their breaks or at stops, things like that. Is the freight supposed to be moving? Are you communicating with the driver? In particular, for the high target loads, do you have a good carrier partner or a good freight broker partner that you're working with that understands the sensitivity of the long holiday weekend, the high target freight, the route that the driver may be having to take just based on where the freight needs to move, right? And what's the theft evaluation along that route? Are you taking all that into account, and are you building good communication around it? And are you ready to go if there's a problem? On a weekend when you may be lighter staffed, do you still have the right people in place that are aware that, hey, you could get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're going to need to respond right away?
So what types of freight are thieves keying in on this year?
Yeah, right now, so we have the norms, right? Food and beverage is almost always number one if everything's normal in the cargo theft world. That's like saying jumbo shrimp. If everything's normal in cargo theft, food and beverage is number one, and then it's alcohol and energy drinks and frozen meats and seafoods within that category, and then household goods, and then electronics. But what the industry has seen quite a bit lately, and there's several BOLOs coming out and a lot of talk about it at conferences and on podcasts and things like that, is loads of copper, metal loads in general. But in particular, copper is being targeted very heavily right now. Over the past 2 months, the industry has seen dozens of cargo loads stolen or rerouted or hit by the double brokering scams. So that commodity in particular, and metals in general right now, are being highly targeted.
Scott went through some best practices earlier, particularly for the upcoming holiday weekend. But what are some things that carriers should be doing all the time?
Maybe I'm a little old school, but I think sometimes the best practices that have been in place for a while are too easily overlooked, right? So when we work with clients, to teach them how to prevent cargo theft. We work on a layered process with them. And for us, it's a 3-layered process. That first layer is always good process and procedures. And a big part of that, especially for fleets, is just training of your frontline staff, training of the drivers, raising awareness of the drivers. I have always said, I think if you went back and looked at any podcast or any media thing that I've done, I have always said I feel like the drivers are the best first front line of defense that the industry has. And so the more you educate the drivers on, hey, you're going to be hauling electronics out of Southern California across the Arizona border, here's what the industry has seen, right? And you can pull that up through CargoNet and other resources to see that pilferage theft of electronics along the Arizona-California border is through the roof. And a lot of times, if you educate the drivers on that and you talk to them about that, they'll avoid those hotspots. If you tell them the hotspots, they'll avoid those hotspots because they don't want to put the freight in that kind of a situation. So I think talking to them about maybe there's an alternative route. You know, when you're parking the truck, are you trying to park it in a well-lit area? Parking it in a secure lot if you have the opportunity? Do you have high security rear door locks on the trailer so that it's harder to get into, so that you're not a soft target? How long is your stop going to be? Are you communicating with your dispatcher when you're making those stops so that they can monitor the tracking closer? Do you have covert tracking in there? And then you get to that second layer, which to us is that hard security type stuff, the high security rear door locks, landing gear locks, air cuff locks, things like that. And then that third layer is the use of technology, whether that's a platform that helps you vet carriers and make sure you're hiring the right carrier, or if you're a carrier, that would be covert tracking, some high security technology-based locking devices that can now be purchased for trailer rear doors and things like that. So we always look at it as old school still works, meaning it's really based on those good process and procedures. Are you educating your staff? Are you helping to inform the drivers there in care, custody, and control of your freight so that they understand the risk that's around the freight and the route that they're going to be driving? And then getting into the enhancing that with the locks and the security and the technology.
While it's important to know where the cargo theft hotspots are around the country, with the proliferation of strategic theft, fleets should always be on alert.
Strategic theft, the big increases that we talked about that were reported through CargoNet on strategic theft have shown us that cargo theft is now beginning to spread into what we would consider non-traditional cargo theft areas of the country. Straight theft continues, and straight theft and within straight theft, which is pilferage, if you look at a heat map, it's the same heat map that we've always seen. Southern California, that Arizona border, Texas, Florida, Georgia, that New York, New Jersey area, Chicago, Memphis. For straight theft, most of that remains pretty much those same hotspots that we've always seen for all the same reasons we've always seen. Ports, rail yards, arterial highways, big economies, population density, all those same things, right? But with strategic theft and these big increases, we're seeing that they can basically be anywhere. And, we now know that a lot of these organized rings are based internationally. So they can be anywhere and they can target freight anywhere because they're going to try and send somebody to go pick it up for them. So don't think that if you're not in one of those traditional hotspots that you're probably not as vulnerable to cargo theft. I don't think that that's true anymore. I think cargo theft is and can be conducted through these strategic theft methods anywhere in the country. And we're seeing that pan out in those industry-based heat maps and statistics.
That's it for this week's 1044. You can read more on ccjdigital.com. While you're there, sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date on the latest in trucking industry news and trends. If you have any questions or feedback, please let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you can catch us again next week.